Europe, named after a Greek mythical lady of Phoenician origin, Europa is the birthplace of democracy, individual liberty, freedom of speech, and all the cool things we enjoy today. Most European countries have no death penalty, and European citizens enjoy the most rights and privileges than any other continent on Earth. Other planets? Elon Musk is trying to find out. Europe is home to some of the greatest composers, as some of my favorites are Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, and more. Some of the greatest artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Vermeer, Manet, Van Gogh, and some of the greatest scientists, Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, and Albert Einstein, to name a few. Europe has also given the world pizza, French fries, chocolate, and some of the best cheese, and some of the best alcohol, wine, beer, and whiskey, and vodka. In this segment, I'll talk about the best novels from the UK, Serbia, Slovakia, Spain, and more. What is the most famous Slovenian novel of all time that also inspired the Assassin's Creed video games? What is the first modern Swedish novel about? Who was the best storyteller of the 20th century? Which novelist wrote about human wolves? And who was the best Ukrainian writer of all time? Let's begin. Serbia. The Tiger's Wife is the debut novel of Serbian-American writer Teja Obret, published in 2011, which won him the 2011 Orange Prize for Fiction. Ivo Andrić, although born in Bosnia, lived most of his life in Belgrade, Serbia, the capital of Yugoslavia, and wrote in Serbo-Croatian language. Another great novelist who wrote in Serbo-Croatian language was Meša Selimović, born in modern-day Bosnia into a Muslim family who also lived in Belgrade. His novel Death and the Dervish, somewhat similar to Kafka's novel The Trial, is about a man's futile fight against authorities, set in 18th century Sarajevo under the Ottoman rule. But it also has elements of Dostoevsky, especially Crime and Punishment, as well as notes from underground, as the novel somewhat ironically argues that to succeed under a repressive regime, one has to employ Machiavellian tactics of deception. Honesty is not the best policy, so to speak. In Death and the Dervish, the protagonist starts to fight for justice for his brother at the beginning, but it goes nowhere, so he instead changes tactics and becomes part of the system and succeeds in becoming an official. To succeed in the world, one should not fight the system but become part of it. In the same vein as in Faust, that you sell your soul in order to succeed in this world. Pavel and Vuk on YouTube both suggested Milorad Pavic's Dictionary of Khazars that tells the story of the Khazar people's conversion to Judaism, a tale that spans from 8th century to the 20th century. Slovakia. Three Chestnut Horses by Margita Fuguli, published in 1940. It is a story of love triangle between a woman, Magdalena, and two men from two ends of socio-economic spectrum. Peter is a poor man who steals horses and walks from place to place to find work, while Zapotokny is rich, cruel, and ruthless man. When young, Peter and Magdalena had made a promise to marry each other, but being poor, Peter is not a viable option for Magdalena's mother, who wants her to marry up someone wealthy. So Zapotokny appears to be a better option. Peter is also very religious, so his love has a more religious tinge to it, while Zapotokny's love is based on lust. This is somewhat similar to Dostoevsky's novel The Idiot, in terms of how religious love is different from animalistic love based on sexual desire, which can get confusing at times. Both novels end in tragedy. I want to thank Sarah Wilson for recommending this novel. She has an amazing blog on Slovakian literature, the link down below. Slovenia. Deseti Brat, or 10th Brother, written by Slovene writer Josip Juricic, is the first novel in Slovene language, but unfortunately not available in English. From what I understand, long ago among the Slavic people there was this tradition that if a couple had 10 kids of the same gender, the 10th child would be forced to leave the house. They would wander around and people would see them as having special power. Nowadays, having 10 kids is not something most couples strive for, but it's worth the sleepless nights, I think, given the superpower you gain. you will have a whole football team. Another notable novel is Alamut, written by the Italian-Slovenian writer Vladimir Bartol. It tells the story of Hassan Sabah, the leader of the Hashashin or the Assassins, an 11th century Ismaili group who terrorized the Islamic world from their base on Mount Alamut in Iran. They were known for their secretive operations and assassinating powerful men during the Seljuk reign in Persia, Arabia, and Anatolia. The name assassin comes from the fact they used cannabis-based drugs or hashish in Arabic. The drug was either used to motivate the assassins or commit suicide once captured, so they don't divulge their secret information. The novel also inspired Assassin's Creed video games. Spain. When it comes to Spanish literature, there's one name that stands very, very, very tall. It's Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote. If Shakespeare's Hamlet is the king of English literature, Don Quixote is the dawn of Spanish literature. It is considered the first modern novel, but it also ticks so many other boxes. It's funny, it's original, it's imaginative, it's incredibly interesting to read. Quixote is one of the most enduring characters in literature. A man who reinvents himself after doing what? Reading. Don Quixote goes mad after reading a lot of books, but he also goes on some amazing adventures that make you love the man even more. He's mad but also a genius. After reading Don Quixote, I've become more worried about my own reading and sanity. Another book that was written a century before Don Quixote is Tirant La Blanche, which had some influence on Cervantes himself. It's a tale of a knight who fights not the windmills, but Turks and Muslims to defend the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople. It is a little bit more serious as it laments the fall of the Byzantine Empire. Guile832 on YouTube suggested Miguel de Unamuno, a philosophical writer who wrote about faith and the human existential question. His novel Abel Sanchez depicts the Bible tale of Abel and Cain in modern Spain to highlight the divide in the country between tradition and modernity. His other novel, Our Lord Don Quixote, published in 1914, gives Cervantes' novel a more existential dress-up. Sweden. Sweden is a home to the Nobel Prize in Literature and gives away a lot of money to the best writers from around the world. August Strindberg's The Red Room, published in 1879, is considered to be the first modern Swedish novel. It tackles the issue of poverty, hypocrisy, and the media manipulation in 19th century Sweden, well before the country became wealthy and egalitarian. Strindberg was a huge name in his days, especially in the left-leaning literary circles, and was a close friend of Émile Zola, the French novelist. He championed women's rights, but then, after divorcing his wife, Siri, he got into a huge fight with the Swedish women of high society. The Red Room is quite an angry novel as it attacks the Swedish elite for saying something and doing the opposite. In recent years, Sweden has become the hotbed of crime fiction, along with its Nordic neighbors. My favorite crime novel by a Swede is the Millennium Trilogy by Stieg Larsson, and I love The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is somewhat similar to The Red Room in exposing how the establishment covers or ignores the deeds of those at the top. The Red Room is not a page-turner, but Larsson's Dragon Tattoo is a real page-turner. Victoria on YouTube suggested Dr. Glass by Hjalmar Soderberg. It's about a woman married to a clergyman but not happy with her sex life, so she approaches Dr. Glass for help. And lo and behold, the doctor falls in love with her. I've not read it, but it sounds intriguing. Switzerland. Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, published in 1927, is about a man who finds himself in a tangle between human outside and the animal on the inside. This depicts the modern condition, especially in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Kafka's man turns into a harmless and useless insect. Hesse, however, explores how humans have struggled between the individualistic side as an animal and the group side as human. In other words, a lone wolf on the inside, but part of a society or a hive on the outside. As a result, we all live a very lonely existence, despite being surrounded by many people. The protagonist thinks he is half human, half wolf from the Eurasian steppes, who roams alone, but this very realization brings a psychological crisis for him. It's a depressing novel full of suicidal ideas as well as free use of drugs and sex. The novel is like opening a wound and staring at it without averting your gaze. We can only find freedom on the inside because we are tamed wolves on the outside. The Buddha was right, peace only comes from within. Hesse's other novel, Siddhartha, did exactly that. It tells the story of a man going through a journey of self-discovery at the time of Buddha. Turkey. Turkey sits on the border of Asia and Europe. The most famous Turkish writer is perhaps Orhan Pamuk, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2006. I read his novel Snow a long time ago and loved it. It was also suggested by Mahati on YouTube. Elif Shafak is also a bestseller, but one of my favorite novels of all time is Mehmet My Hawk by Yashar Kamal. It follows the life of a poor young man Mehmet who escapes his harsh life under the rule of a village landowner. But his freedom comes at a huge cost and he has to return to free his lover. But he faces so many dilemmas, terrifying encounters, and difficult adventures. It's one of the most tragic stories you will ever read, but also full of uplifting moments of magic. While reading, your heart will be in your mouth. I'm quite used to reading dark and tragic novels, but while reading these I was so incredibly nervous like a child. Yashar Kamal is one of the best storytellers of the 20th century. The novel is mythical, beautiful, tragic, and a liberating epic all in one. This novel will teach you how myths are created and how legends are formed. It's an incredibly musical novel and I am amazed that it's not more well known. Another novel from Turkey that should be read is The Disconnected by Oguz Atay, published in 1971. It's a mystery tale as to how and why a man has committed suicide, and his friend tracks down anyone close to the man, only to learn that he was a tortured soul. It's a very difficult novel, considered almost untranslatable. The main question it poses is this: can we really know another person? Ukraine. One of the biggest names in Russian literature is Nikolai Gogol, who was a Ukrainian who wrote in Russian, the language of the Russian Empire back then. He was the first of the so-called Russian giants who established prose fiction as a literary form in Russia. His masterpiece, Dead Souls, is one of the finest satirical novels and its first novel in Russian literature. Writers like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Turgenev were hugely influenced by Gogol and his comic tone. He wrote many amazing short stories that influenced so many great writers from around the world, like Franz Kafka. His earlier works, a few collection of short stories, were mostly set in Ukraine, but to seek a wider readership, he later wrote mostly about Russia. One of the best known novels of recent time is Death and the Penguin by Andrei Platonov, whose dark comedy resembles that of Nikolai Gogol. Another important novel is the 2009 The Museum of Abandoned Secrets by Oksana Zabushko, which won a few major awards. The novel deals with the recent history of Ukraine since World War II and up to the Orange Revolution. It's a very long novel which some have compared to Dostoevsky's work. United Kingdom. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman by Lawrence Sterne was published in 1760s. It's one of the favorite novels of all time. It's written in the most hilarious style, witty, funny, and bizarre. It is an anti-novel because it's full of digressions to the point that getting to the point is not even the point, if that makes sense at all. It's a brilliantly innovative and visual and extraordinarily funny novel. It is tinged with that Irish mischief we see in James Joyce. Lawrence Sterne was also Irish-born but lived most of his life in England. When you read a novel, you would not believe it was written by a priest. British literature is so vast that I have a video talking about my top 10 best novels of all time. Nigel on YouTube suggested John Milton's Paradise Lost, published in 1667, which encompasses the entire Western religious mind and its psychological and historical depth. Pilipala on YouTube argued that lumping the entire UK into one novel is unfair, as all 4 countries have unique cultures. So for Wales, he suggested the Mabinogion, written in 12th century, that tells a story of pre-Christian Celtic people. that also includes the legends of King Arthur. Andrew, another viewer from Scotland, suggested Robin Jenkins' The Cone Gatherers, published in 1955. It's about two brothers employed in a Scottish country estate while the country is involved in the Second World War. Instead of a peaceful countryside, it's a tragic tale of obsession, sacrifice, and hatred. The Vatican City. Those living in the Vatican do not have time for fiction because they deal with religious religious faith. So I suggest the Bible or the Da Vinci Code. The Bible tells you where everyone comes from. Spoiler, we are kicked out of a beautiful garden. The Da Vinci Code tells you where the secret is hidden. Spoiler, pyramid. All joking aside, the Vatican City has been the setting for so many thrillers written by American, English, Portuguese, Spanish, and even Japanese writers. I begin to see a pattern. There has to be some mystery in the Vatican that intrigues so many writers. So if you want to write a cheap thriller that sells in millions, use the Vatican City as its setting. Okay, Europe has so many amazing novels that the list cannot do them justice. I could talk about European literature all day, but I will have to stop here. In my next video, I'll head to Asia, so if you have any recommendations, send them my way. Thank you for watching.